with your host, Jaden Miller.
Good day and welcome to Think About It with Jaden Miller. I am your host, Jaden Miller. Welcome back to the podcast. Before I begin, please like, share, and subscribe on my YouTube channel, and like, comment, and follow on your favorite podcast platform. You can find out more about me and more about Think About It with Jaden Miller on my website at www.jadenmiller.com. You can find me on all of the podcast platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, Google Podcast, Castbox, and a whole host of others. So again, welcome back to the show. Today I'm going to delve into this whole Russia-Ukrainian conflict. All right. And the gist of this is to hopefully get Americans to see why this is such an important incident for us to be concerned about. It stems back to previous wars, of course. You know, the unchecked power of Adolf Hitler during World War II. You know, the appeasement by Great Britain and other nations. And of course, the United States back prior to the beginning of World War II, taking an isolationist stance when Germany was invading Europe. All right. And so it's so important that we take a look at history because it certainly gives us a roadmap to what's happening today. So let me give you a little background on this whole Russian-Ukrainian issue. So understand that following the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, Ukraine and Russia continued to retain close ties. All right. You should know that the Ukraine was its own nation back in the early 1900s. All right. And it became a part of the Soviet Union and remained a part of the Soviet Union for many years. And then, of course, with the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, Ukraine again became its own nation. All right. So let's go a little bit further. In 1994, Ukraine agreed to abandon its nuclear arsenal and signed the Budapest Memorandum on Security Assurances on the condition that Russia, the United Kingdom, which is Great Britain, and the United States would issue an assurance against threats or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of Ukraine. All right. 5 years later, Russia was one of the signatories of the Charter for European Security, where it reaffirmed the inherent right of each and every participating state to be free to choose or change its security arrangements, including treaties of alliance as they evolve. Well, we know that Russia has backed away from that. Despite being a recognized independent country since 1991, as a former Soviet constituent republic, Ukraine had been perceived by the leadership of Russia as being part of its sphere of influence. All right. So in essence, Russian President Vladimir Putin, and of course, Russia felt as though, hey, Ukraine had been a part of the Soviet Union, had been a part of us for so long that, well, they're still a part of us. All right. But in 2008, Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke out against Ukraine's membership in NATO, did not want Ukraine to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is made up of many European nations and other nations as well, for the protection of Europe, against invasions, against madmen like Adolf Hitler back during World War II. All right. But then also understand that NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization nations, are right there on the border of Russia. And so Russia is fearful of Western democratic dominance in the area. All right. And what happens then is their sphere of influence begins to lessen. And so that's why he spoke up against Russia, against the Ukraine becoming a member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. So in 2009, Romanian analyst Iulian Shifu and his co-authors opined that in regard to Ukraine, Russia has pursued an updated version of the Brezhnev Doctrine. All right. Leonid Brezhnev was a president of the United Soviet Socialist Republics, or USSR, or the Soviet Union, back during the 70s. All right. Well, it dictates that sovereignty of Ukraine cannot be larger than that of the Warsaw Pact's member states prior to the collapse of the Soviet sphere of influence during the late 1980s and early 1990s. This view is built upon the premise that Russia's actions to placate the West in the early 1990s should have been met with reciprocity from the West without NATO expansion along Russia's border. Again, there's this concern about NATO expansion, about Western influence in Russia's area, so-called area. All right. Now, let's move forward. Following weeks of protest as part of the Euromaidan movement in 2013 and 2014, then pro-Russian Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych and the leaders of the Ukrainian parliamentary opposition on February 21st, 2014, signed a settlement agreement that called for an early election. All right. The following day, Yanukovych fled from Kiev, which is the capital of Ukraine, ahead of an impeachment vote that stripped him of his powers as president. All right. So in essence, what happened was Yanukovych, who was pro-Russia, all right, was going against the will of the people. All right. Leaders of the Russian-speaking eastern regions of Ukraine declared continuing loyalty to Yanukovych, all right, causing the 2014 pro-Russian unrest in Ukraine. The unrest was followed by the annexation of Crimea by Russia in March 2014 and the war in Donbas, which started in April 2014 with the creation of the Russia-backed quasi-states of the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic. All right, so just to give you some perspective, what Vladimir Putin is doing is he's coming up with this propaganda and setting up his own people in Ukraine to cause unrest. All right. So he wants there to be unrest in Ukraine so that he can step in some way, shape, or form and re-annex Ukraine, to bring Ukraine back into its sphere of influence. All right. And so he's done these or caused this escalation in words initially, all right, and violence next, okay, to potent, dissension within the Ukrainian nation, all right? And so this has been his plan for quite some time, all right? So why is this so important to us? Well, let's talk about Russia's unprovoked attack on the Ukraine that began last Thursday, after weeks and weeks of buildup. But let's go back and talk about what President Joe Biden knew and all of the things, the aftermath of this since the buildup has started. All right. In October, President Joe Biden's national security team presented him with grim details of President Vladimir Putin's plan to invade. So they've kind of known about this for a while. All right. Political leaders on both sides of the Atlantic quickly raised the specter of the largest war on the European continent since the end of World War II. Again, what Americans should realize is that this has the potential to becoming much, much bigger. All right. And we need to pay really, really close attention to what's going on. All right. In another part of the world. Just because it is not impacting America's borders per se does not mean that it can't in the future. Let's look at World War II. All right. The United States stayed out of it. All right. At least they stayed out of it in terms of militarily. All right. Until about 2 years after it started, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, unbeknownst to the Americans, at least officially. All right. Or at least what history tells us. All right. Well, then, while it didn't come to America's borders, meaning the East Coast or the West Coast, the war still impacted the United States because Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, was an American territory, all right, which then catapulted the United States into the war once it was attacked by one of the Axis powers, Japan, all right, along with Italy and Germany, all right. Well, we decided then to take this isolationist approach to stay out of it, of course, because Americans had been involved in World War I. It was a costly war, all right? And America just wanted to stay out of those types of wars again, all right? It seemed as though Europe was so far away, all right? But to be silent like the United States was back then when, in Germany, you had Jewish people being attacked and relegated to ghettos. They were then being sent to concentration camps and killed, all right? Yet the United States stayed out of that, all right? It's so important that we learn from our history, all right? So in the fall of 2021, most Americans seemed unaware of or ambivalent to the impending danger. All right. And this is not surprising. Many Americans no longer remember the Cold War. All right. The Russian invasion of Hungary and Czechoslovakia, or the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Berlin Wall has now been down for more years than it stood, and the Soviet Union disappeared more than 30 years ago. All right. With a full-scale attack by Russian troops now ongoing, it's important for Americans to understand why we should care about what happens to a country very few have visited or know much about. Simply put, the Russian invasion will have a real impact on American national security. And Washington's support for Ukrainian democracy is our best guarantee against war and for the continuation of peace. This is an attack on democracy, all right, the rule of law, and the values the United States has stood for throughout its history. To understand why, you must first understand that democracy has been under siege for the past several years. All right. Freedom House, which follows every country in the world, reported that global political freedom has declined every year since 2006. Last year, its report concluded the countries experiencing deterioration outnumbered those with improvements by the largest margin recorded since the negative trends began. If Russia continues in its invasion and occupying of Ukraine, it would contribute markedly to this global recession. Now, Ukraine was recognized as an independent state by Russia more than 30 years ago. All right. The Charter of Paris, signed in November 1990 by the United States, Russia, and 30 European countries, established essential principles for a post-Cold War era based on international law and global norms. Subsequently, Russia, the United States, and Great Britain guaranteed the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine in 1995, as I believe I've already mentioned in the Budapest Memorandum. So Moscow in Russia has no more legal basis to insist on any portion of the territory of Ukraine than Germany has to the right to demand the return of Alsace and Lorraine from France. If the West accepts such Russian claims, it will not only undermine the sovereignty of all countries, but also invite other nations to seek territory through military force. All right. It is so important that history does not repeat itself. In September 1938, Neville Chamberlain, Britain's prime minister at the time, returned from a summit with Adolf Hitler, who was the chancellor of Germany, in Munich. The German dictator had demanded that portions of Czechoslovakia become part of his Third Reich. Chamberlain acceded to Hitler's demands, and upon his return to Great Britain, he proclaimed peace for our time. In fact, Chamberlain's policy of appeasement resulted in the catastrophe of World War II. So think back, if Europe would have stood up against Hitler back then, okay, prior to his invasion of Czechoslovakia, his invasion into Poland and other areas, then it perhaps could have been averted if those European countries who were strong at the time would have stood up to Hitler. They just simply ignored and appeased him. And that is what we should not be doing, all right, in the Ukraine, with Russia having now invaded this country. All right. But despite such clear historical precedents, polls suggest Americans have mixed feelings about how the United States should respond to Ukraine. Then, we've got some Republican leaders who have openly agreed with Fox News host Tucker Carlson, who has suggested we shouldn't be picking sides at all. Obviously, Tucker Carlson does not know his history. All right. And of course, in an astonishing interview, former President Donald Trump praised Putin as a genius. Okay. Others argued Biden had not been tough enough on Moscow. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell called for global unity, advising Biden that the world is watching how America and its allies respond to Russian aggression. Well, McConnell is correct. For one, the leaders of communist China, and I've talked to many of my friends about this, that this invasion into the Ukraine by Russia is only the beginning, unless, it is met with the severest of repercussions to Russia that are possible without having to use military force. All right. And I say that because, this could turn into a real powder keg. All right. The United States has the strongest military on earth. All right. Russia, depending on who you talk to, comes second. But the United States has great and a more advanced technology than the Russians do. But the Russians still have great military strength. All right. And so you're canceling each other out. All right. But who should be watched is China, because not really taking a strong stance against this unchecked military action, or less than, then what does China do? All right. So the leaders of communist China are carefully watching how the United States and its allies react as Beijing in China considers its demands to control Taiwan and the South China Sea. All right. Do we seek to live in a world guided by international law or the law of the jungle, where, according to a famous quote attributed to Greek historian Thucydides, the strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must? Think about that. Think about it with Jaden Miller. All right, let me take a break real quick just to remind you to please like, share, and subscribe on my YouTube channel, and like, comment, and follow on your favorite podcast platform. All right, again, this is Jaden Miller. Thank you for joining me. We're talking today about this whole Russian invasion into the Ukraine and why it is important as Americans, as members of the United States or citizens of the United States, that we take this seriously. All right. Okay, the West must decide to seek a system of joint responsibility for security and peace, or accept spheres of influence like those created at Yalta in 1945. All right. Well, Putin has been quite candid about his ultimate goals. All right. He has been quite candid. and they extend well beyond the border of eastern Ukraine. In his annual address to the Russian people in 2005, Putin said the collapse of the Soviet Empire was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. Well, of course, that depends on who you talk to. All right. Western leaders shrugged off these remarks as political polemic, but it now seems clear the Russian leader believes his own mythology. As a result, he has pursued a three-pronged strategy. First, undermine American leadership and liberal democracy in general. How has he been doing that? Well, hey, look at how Donald Trump responds to Putin. And now how Joe Biden is. All right. Putin could not stand Barack Obama, and Barack Obama couldn't stand Putin, but Putin was checked under Barack Obama, all right? Because even though Putin has military strength, he was no dummy, and he understood that Barack Obama was not playing with him, all right? Then we have President Trump that comes in, who has this more relaxed relationship, and who shares and who talks chummily with Putin. All right. Well, while I certainly believe in diplomacy, all right, I also believe in being tough and being strong. All right. And I do not believe that Donald Trump was that. He kowtowed and placated Putin, which is not what was needed. All right. So you've got Putin and you've got Xi Jinping, the leader of China, who have both expressed a shared belief that liberal democracies are in decline and that now is the time to accelerate their demise. How do they do that? By causing disruptions in a nation. Haven't we had some disruptions in this nation? Of course we have. There was the whole craziness of January 6th, when these crazy people walked in and attacked the Capitol. All right. We've had voting irregularities where it's been believed that Russia was involved in the 2016 U.S. elections. All right. And in other nations as well, particularly the United Kingdom. All right. So it's those kinds of things that are happening. All right. Second, driving wedges between the United States and its NATO allies in order to destroy the alliance. All right. So they also cause confusion. All right. So you've got, especially during Trump's administration, you've got the United States and France now at odds, or the United States and Germany now at odds. Not the United States as a nation, but its leadership at the time. All right. And then thirdly, reassert Russian control over countries that comprise the Soviet Union, especially those with large Russian-speaking populations characterized as the near abroad. So, to be clear, there's already an ongoing, albeit often quiet, effort by Putin to achieve these goals. The Ukraine is only one more data point in a long pattern of behavior that includes alleged interference in American and European elections, like I just mentioned, and possibly even the Brexit vote in the United Kingdom. For years, there have been a report of Putin ordering the assassination of Russians living outside of Russia. In 2008, Putin orders an invasion of Georgia, not the United States Georgia, but Georgia over in Europe, and seized two provinces, South Ossetia and Abkhazia, where he established puppet governments. And of course, in 2014, Putin directed the invasion of Ukraine and the seizure of Crimea after the Maidan Revolution deposed a Moscow-friendly president. And I've already mentioned him. All right. He also fomented a rebellion in eastern Ukraine that has resulted in the deaths of more than 14,000 Ukrainians in the past 8 years. Putin's claims that Ukraine poses a military threat and is historically part of Russia are clearly preposterous. The Lithuanian Prime Minister aptly describes such analysis as beyond Orwell and Kafka. Putin does, however, fear that Ukraine might become a successful democracy and market economy. If that occurred, it would serve as an example to the Russian people that could ultimately threaten his control at home. All right. So again, we're talking about NATO being right on the border, all right? And if the Ukrainians were to join NATO and become a free and democratic nation, what could that potentially do for Russia? Well, the Russian people have been living under communism forever, all right? But then to see a former member of the USSR now having the freedoms that Western countries do, as opposed to Russia being controlled by, Putin and his minions, all right, then they may seek maybe revolution, the changing of things for the people, all right? There's apparently an old Russian proverb that says, if you dance with the bear decides when the dance is over. Putin will not change his aims. Even if the current crisis should end peacefully, he will continue to pursue these goals and strategy. All right. Consequently, our collective response to Putin's actions must reflect our vital national security interests. These include fulfilling our commitments to NATO, supporting global democracy, and upholding international law. The United States, our NATO allies, and other democratic states are in this fight together. We cannot go back to a nation of isolationism, okay, where we just let other countries destroy other countries because they have a mightier military. That is not international law. That is not how a universal community, a world community lives together. All right, it's not. So one person is a bully and they get to bully the rest of the world. Okay, well, bullies need to be stood up to. All right, and that's what the United States, NATO, and other democratic states have got to do. Russia is large. It is a big nation. But a message needs to be sent because the rest of the world is bigger than Russia. All right. China needs to be checked. All right, which is what the United States has done. Checked their power. Let them know, all right, that if this happens, then there's going to be repercussions for this. All right. Well, NATO is a key part of this whole alliance, okay, keeping Russia at bay because it remains a cornerstone of American national security policy in Europe and globally. NATO was essential to American national security strategy in the aftermath of World War II. All right. This was the basis for the Pax Americana that provided enormous benefits. Living standards have improved dramatically and warfare has decreased. By the start of the 21st century, death due to armed conflict had sunk to the lowest levels in recorded human history. All right. Now, let's be honest. I know that there are people that are on maybe a different political aisle than I may be because I ride the aisle of independent. Okay, so, I would just like to put that out there. I am not a Democrat. I am not a Republican. I am not liberal. I am not conservative. I'm independent, meaning that I make my own decisions and I don't allow political parties to make them for me. Okay, I am a free thinker. All right. However, President Trump damaged our allies' faith in the United States to fulfill its obligations to international peace and security. He frequently criticized European leaders, questioned the value of NATO, threatened to withdraw the United States from the alliance, and suggested America might not live up to its commitments. All right. So now you had all of that going on for 4 years under Donald Trump. All right. And then there are people that have the nerve to say that Putin would not have invaded the Ukraine if President Trump was still president, as if to say that Donald Trump would have stood in his way. Well, it seems to me that over those 4 years, that if Donald Trump were still the president, and knowing his relationship with Putin, that the United States could possibly become a colony of Russia. All right. Our official language could possibly be Russian if President Trump was still the president. All right. So the Biden administration's chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, a NATO mission, further frayed our credibility. All right. Many Americans today remain unaware that our NATO allies voted to support the United States following the terrorist attacks of September 11th. Our European allies fought and died alongside American forces in Afghanistan. Now, once again, American values, principles, and national security are at risk. Experts suggest that a full-scale invasion, which there is, could now lead to 50,000 civilian deaths, as well as tens of thousands of Russian and Ukrainian soldiers. We could soon witness 1 million to 5 million refugees fleeing into Poland, Romania, or Hungary. All right. So unlike what Tucker Carlson or Donald Trump have said, this conflict may be geographically distant, just like World War II was, but its consequences could have ripple effects that extend far beyond Eastern Europe. Americans must recognize that this crisis is not just about Vladimir Putin. It truly is about us. All right, this is Jaden Miller. I want you to think about all of those things that I just shared with you. Why Russia's Ukraine invasion should matter to Americans. All right, again, please like, share, and subscribe on my YouTube channel. Follow me. All right. Follow me on my YouTube channel. Think About It with Jaden Miller. All right. Please like, comment, and follow on your favorite podcast platform. As I've mentioned, I'm on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Google Podcasts, Castbox, iHeartRadio, and so many more. All right. So, guys, I want you to continue to watch. You can't live in a bubble, all right? We're not hermits, all right? This invasion of the Ukraine is important, all right? And we can't continue to hide behind TikTok and Instagram or, continue to play our video games while people are being killed in Europe across the ocean. All right. We really need to be cognizant. All right. Because the war that is over there could just as easily become the war that is over here. All right. And there are many 18, 19, 20-year-olds who are just graduating from high school or going to college or getting jobs that may be called up, okay, to participate in a war that certainly does not need to happen. All right. So again, this is really important. All right. And Americans cannot be isolated. We can't hide. We can't say that, oh, that's a problem for those people. All right. We can't continue to placate dictators. All right. History has shown us we cannot cozy up to Vladimir Putin, regardless of what the ex-president says. All right. We've got to be strong and resolved, and we've got to stand up for the Ukrainian people, just as the Ukrainian people have stood up for the United States. All right. So again, thank you guys for listening. Think About It with Jaden Miller. I'll see you on the next episode. Have a fabulous, fabulous day.
Thank you for listening to Think About It with Jaden Miller. Don't forget to like and subscribe to his YouTube channel, and like and follow on your favorite podcast platform.